Welcome everyone to the final MPA University's hybrid masterclass session. The past 6 weeks have been filled with such amazing conversations surrounding hybrid events, and I cannot thank you all enough for joining us. For our final session, we're going to be chatting with Joe Schwinger, who is our Chief Innovation Officer at MeetingPlay plus Eventry, and Jen Ammon, Senior Event Manager at Databricks, to break down the biggest lessons they have learned during their experience planning hybrid events. With a background in e-commerce, Joe has extensive experience providing customer-facing solutions on a global scale. Before co-founding MeetingPlay in 2011 and beginning to serve as its CEO, he built and led several successful business initiatives. Prior to his entrepreneurial experiences, he was key to developing global e-commerce solutions with individual properties for Marriott International. He built the e-commerce organization for the Eastern region at Marriott, which involved dedicated plans for full-service hotels in that region. Then he oversaw e-commerce for North America during a reorganization to help build the foundation of e-commerce at Marriott globally. Through his experience at Marriott, Joe saw what the future of meetings could look like and really started to venture what made his vision a reality. Jen runs the strategic and internal events function for Databricks. She has run everything from one-day roadshows to their proprietary Data plus AI conference. Prior to Databricks, she worked for the Yahoo Buzz marketing team, working on events that were designed to bring the Yahoo brand to life. She got her start with the Macy's event team in New York City, where she learned how to fly parade balloons along with other valuable event skills. She holds a master's in international marketing and currently resides in San Francisco. Joe will be joining us for the first half of this session as we kick off some more event-specific conversation with Jen on the latter half of the hour. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. Hey, everyone.
Hi. Well, first of all, holding balloons has got to be added to my resume. Jen, that's quite an accomplishment there. But also I wanted to say, not spoken here today, I'm really excited because, believe it or not, Jen is very important to MeetingPlay plus Eventry. When the pandemic hit, I had the great fortune of working with Databricks and Jen specifically. And I do want to go on record as saying, in the very early days of the pandemic, everybody was looking to push the envelope. And I've never met anybody, an organization or Jen and the rest of her team, that was more willing to take risk and push the envelope. And that Data and AI Summit was just unheard of for what we accomplished. So first of all, Jen, congratulations on what you've done over the last couple of years. And thank you on behalf of everybody at MeetingPlay and Eventry for your contributions to getting us where we are today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. And you guys were a great partner for us, so we couldn't have done it without you. So thanks for jumping on the ship with us as we tried to sail out and make something happen. So thanks.
It was fun, that's for sure.
Wonderful. Well, we are kind of switching up this session. The past sessions we've done more presentation based, whereas this we are taking truly two experts of hybrid events and just asking you guys questions the whole time and picking your brains and just kind of going under the hood to see what you've experienced in the past 2 years and beyond, kind of seeing what you have to say after the 5 weeks of us learning about hybrid and really understanding what it means to plan those events. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to just get us kicked off.
Go for it.
Well, I'm going to start with something that is kind of reflective of the past 5 weeks and to ask what it truly means to be an event planner these days, and how has that title morphed into something bigger and better than what we saw even 2 years ago?
I mean, for me, I think it's become a huge thing, and it's not. We joked at our CKO this year that the chief people officer is now also the head nurse of the school, and I kind of feel that way as an event planner as well. Like, I had to learn so much about COVID and all these different things along the way. So there's all these different skills that you thought you knew as an event planner, and then there was all these new things that you now were in charge of and had to help figure out. And people were looking to you as being the expert, and you're like, I don't know, I'm just gonna say it with gusto and hope that it actually is true, and then have to go back and figure it out. So I think that the scope has expanded beyond just the traditional, like, this is how you run something, to this is how you think about all the people who are watching remotely, think about what the experience is like for people in person who now have to live in a world where there's COVID and all the different rules and regulations and all these things. So I think it's really expanded on what your skill set actually needs to be to get a successful event done in this new world.
Yeah. And let me add a couple of things that I think that Jen did that I think are best practices for those that are watching is so they were planning, and Jen, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I will for a little bit. They were planning their company kickoff during, I would say, the height or maybe coming down a little bit the height of Omicron. And there was a lot of uncertainty. And what I applaud Databricks and Jen for is using some data to help inform decisions that were made, but having a backup plan. So as there was a lot of uncertainty, and Databricks is a global company, and there was international folks that were coming to the event, not just domestic, they put a survey out there. What's your comfort level? How do you feel? Right? And really opened it up for full transparency to what they would potentially be planning for. And what is best about what happened after is there was always pivots and planning for those pivots along the way. I think that, and again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Jen, but every company that we work with wanted their employees to get together and have that human interaction. But the data came back and said, well, we're not going to have 100% of our employees come together. And we need to be prepared for those people virtually to feel as though they are with us the best that they possibly can. And, Jen, I don't remember what happened after that, but I think the data moved and you guys pivoted a couple of times. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we shifted many times in thought process. We shifted many times in what we thought was actually going to ring true. When we first started, we were like, maybe 10% won't come. And then as Omicron started, it was right when we were about to launch registration. And then it really became a thing of, do we feel comfortable still doing this? Because we do want people to, come. I didn't want to be a super spreader event, right? Like I didn't want people to come and be like, hey, thanks for having this. You made me come and now I have COVID. So we really, to your point, we sent a lot of surveys. We got a lot of feedback. We spent a lot of time with our CEO. We spent a lot of time with our chief people officer. We spent a lot of time. We hired a local hospital to help advise us on COVID protocols. And we, set rules forth and we said, these are the rules and this is sort of what it's going to be. We didn't really pivot from that really in a lot of ways. Like that was the one thing that we were like, even though the rules changed in the location, we didn't change the rules for the event because really people made decisions based on this. We can't then change what the protocols are actually going to be. So yeah, we spent a lot of time, a lot of questions. I think our COVID protocol document on your site, on the registration site was probably about 7 pages long. So many questions because people, were really concerned about it. And it was something that we definitely didn't want to put anybody in any danger. We really wanted to make sure people were comfortable. And, I met with e-staff almost every other week just to talk about like where we are, what the comfort level is, all that stuff. So it was plan upon plan upon plan was really in place.
Yeah. And, outside of the engagement features, which I'm sure we'll get to, the other thing that I would compliment the team on is something that I've been talking about for over a year now. Is there's two things that I always make a recommendation when people ask me, how do you plan the best hybrid event? So the first is have everybody at the starting line together, right? So the planning team, the agency, and technology were all at the same starting point in planning moving forward, which allowed for all of those changes to happen in real time as data was coming in. And then the second was, I think that Databricks as a company planned this event through the lens of safety, which is always number one, if not number two, right? So when you even look at the touch points with the registration on property, they were separate from badge pickup to allow for there to be walkway and, to combat social distancing the best that you possibly can with 1,000 people showing up at the same time. So I applaud everybody being at the starting point together, planning a safe and engaging event. And then, lastly, through that lens of safety, everything was kind of checked and balanced that happened on property.
Yeah.
And I know when we had talked, I think in our reskilling the events workforce, we had seen quite a lot. That was with Type A, who talked about that, who I know you guys have worked with, and just truly like how in depth that process got, and how you have to almost over plan. I think that's kind of what you're talking about too, Jen, is you have to plan for the plan B, C, all the way through Z at this point. And so from that, do you think that's going to continue on? Or do you think as variants kind of slow down, do you think planners will loosen up a bit and not have to do so much? Or do you think it's kind of the new way that we're going to have to think about events moving forward?
I think it's definitely something at least in the short term, that we're going to have to think about, because even if, as a lot of cities are relaxing regulations, I think San Francisco is changing the rules on April 1st, like mega events no longer require vaccines. They recommend them, but they don't require. But you still run the risk of something happening, right? Like, so you have to be prepared for that, even if the rules have changed. People are still coming to your event. They're still interacting with folks. You need to understand what happens if somebody tests positive. What's that reaction going to be? For us, for CKO, it was an internal event. Like, what is the protocol? Like, what do we have to do? If somebody tests positive, what is the reaction? What do we deliver? Like, we had teams that were delivering snacks and foods and all these different things and checking in on them every day. And then there's testing and all these things. So no matter what happens in the short term, you're going to have to be prepared for anything to happen. And I think that's the tough part, right? Is like, you plan for it, you bring your umbrella hoping it doesn't rain. And this is what's going to happen, right? Like, you have to have a plan for it, because the last thing you want to do is then be forced with that situation in the middle of it. And you're trying to run an event and you're trying to figure out what to do here. So you're going to have some sort of plan in place, and hopefully you don't have to use it, but it's got to be there. Otherwise you're going to be shooting yourself, because you're like, I can't believe I didn't prepare for this. And now
Right.
I'm worried. And what am I going to do?
Yeah, a couple thoughts for me on that. First of all, I'm stealing the bring your umbrella and hope you don't have to use it. Thanks, Jen. So I definitely think that there's a variation to all of that. However, what I would say, and MeetingPlay eventually tends to work with a lot of corporate customers, is at the end of the day, what Jen said is true. Like, your name is on the line, right? And if even one or two folks get COVID, and even if it's not severe, you're still ultimately, at the end of the day, your name is associated with an event where people may have fell ill. And you need to keep that in mind. The second thing that I would say, and I've been talking about this for months now when people ask me that same question, is we are going to see peaks and valleys of hybrid, in-person, virtual only. But I really honestly believe that we're about 6 to 8 months from us being in the groove to really understand where technology fits in to this curve that we're talking about. And what we've been saying is, and we're still seeing this today in our planning, is if you look at corporate events as a marketing funnel, which they typically do, at the top end of that funnel, we want really big reach. And that's where virtual or hybrid is going to play. But when you get down to the lower end of the funnel, so part of Data and AI Summit, Jen does massive training for thousands of people. That was good virtually, might be a little bit better, because again, that's towards the bottom of the funnel. Those are targeted customers, and they probably are pre-existing customers, might be better in person. So, my answer to this is that we're about 6 to 8 months away from seeing a reaction to more of a common flow of event technology making its way into predictable hybrid, in-person, and virtual only.
That actually leads me to my next question, is how has that tech changed in the hybrid space? So what was a pre-pandemic and where are we at now? So what is the standard now rather than the 6 to 8 months?
Do you want to take a quick, you want to go first, Jen? I mean, I'll use another one of my famous phrases, right? Like, the event technology, more though the Gens of the world, don't take this in the wrong way, went from Blockbuster to Netflix in 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
And if you look at investment, advancement in event technology, I mean, never have we seen things move the way that they have. But the big difference, not just event technology, is that we've moved our planners and our customers along with that advancement. And there are plenty of companies like Databricks, plenty of meeting planners like Jen, that see the advantages of what hybrid will bring to them that simply just was not there before the pandemic because attendee adoption was not what it is today. And that's why I'm saying we're going to see a leveling of the peaks and the valleys, not an all or nothing, but a way to complement the experience. And do we know exactly what that's going to be in 6 months? No, because again, we're still learning in this hybrid environment as one variant comes down, another one potentially comes up. We'll see some rocky roads, but we are going to see things stabilize a little bit. Jen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say I think people now expect it to, and they expect it to be a better experience than a standard, like, I'm going to jump on a Zoom and talk to you. Because I think that's what a lot of, for us in the beginning or before the pandemic, we didn't really do a lot of virtual stuff. Almost everything was in person. We would occasionally do some webinars, things like that, but it was very limited. Now I think people expect a better experience, and it's not just the standard that you had in the past. So that's then driving us to be like, how can we make this better? And I think that's going to be a continuing process, at least the next 6, 8, maybe 12 months of people demanding that this experience be not just a one-way exchange where I'm just talking to you the entire time. Like, how do I actually get involved? How do I participate? Because people want that. I think the thing that people really miss from in-person events is that interaction with folks. So how do you actually deliver that to people is going to be the continuing thing, I think.
One more thing before I turn it back over is on the tail end of what Jen said, like, there is so much pent up demand for people getting together face to face. Another reason why I say though, that in 6 to 8 months, we're going to see things normalize is all of us were dying to get together, prior to the pandemic, but also a lot of us were looking for other options than the travel that comes along with that. So me personally, I constantly was on the road. Probably I would say 3.5 out of the 4 weeks of a month, I was on the road. And sure, I was one of those people that was like, man, I just can't wait to get back out there. But now that I've taken 1 or 2 trips, I'm very happy having this conversation, virtually, right? So people are going to get that out of their system. We're going to get back to how does technology supplement that in the long run?
Yeah. And I know you have to leave soon, Joe, but I wanted to end with this kind of question. You talked about building communities in your hybrid event. I think that has a lot to do with engagement, and I think Databricks has done a good job at this. Is that something that you find that's still relevant as people continue to plan hybrid events, creating the conversations between both and bridging that environment?
If there's one buzzword for the 2022, it's community building online. And let's step back for a second and let's take, Data and AI Summit as an example. 70,000 people, right? What a huge opportunity to create a community of members to constantly talk, right? You have their attention. What I think is missing and why this is not mainstream yet is we haven't gotten to the normalization, and community hasn't really fit into that event strategy. Now, are we getting close potentially? Yes. Is bringing people on property interfering with that? Yes. So I would say there's a lot of discussion around community building online. I would say there's less positive ROI metrics yet that go along with it. Takes a big investment of time of the people that are trying to put it on, and the ROI is simply just not there yet. As we start to normalize, I think again this will be another tactic that crystallizes for companies. You will obviously first see associations with members, right? Members that go into these topics probably move in that direction, less corporate, but I think everybody will play a role moving forward.
Awesome. Well, Joe, I know you have to hop off, so I'm going to scooch over with Jen to kind of talk a little bit more about the intricacies of what she's had to do with Databricks, but we'll also still talk about kind of more overall things about hybrid. But thank you so much for joining us, Joe. It's been a pleasure.
She could write a book on everything that she's taught us. So good luck, Jen and Lauren, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye,
Thank
Joe.
you very much. Awesome. Well, we'll kick it over a little bit. Do you have anything to add, by the way, to what Joe was saying about building communities? I know you guys have done some pretty phenomenal things between kind of bridging the two audiences in hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's core to what we've been trying to do, really. And I think that's one of the things that, working with you and your team has really helped us crystallize. I think at the beginning when we were first starting to plan out Data and AI Summit way back when, in 2020, it seems like forever ago at this point, that was one of the things that we really wanted to try and get through was that sense of community and that team building, because the show has essentially always been that. It's the time for the community to come together. It's a community led like content show still, and to not have that interaction between folks was the one thing that we really were concerned about and missing. So, we were always pushing to see what else can we do? What can we do to actually drive these interactions? And I think that's going to be super key. Like figuring out the secret sauce to it, I don't think has been figured out quite yet, but we're trying, and we're trying new things all the time to try and actually get there, because that's the one thing that we really want. Like that human experience is what is missing a lot of times. So figuring that out, I think, is going to be super key. And as Joe said, like we're continuing to make strides in it, and we're getting closer and closer, but it's still easy to turn your camera off and not participate in things. So like, how do you actually drive people to actually do that is the big thing.
Yeah, that's been one thing that I've seen just overall, no matter what type of event you're in, if it's hybrid, it's really hard to get people to just genuinely participate with each other. I think it's a lot easier at let's say a trade show, and you're walking around and you come up to a booth and you see someone and you get that kind of initial feel of someone. For those people who, one, don't like to chat and network, it's ultra hard to get them to do it. But from, the people who come with the intent to, yes, I want to communicate with the virtual audience, or yes, I want to try out all this new tech and opportunity, do you find that those are your early adopters, or does everyone kind of try their hand at all the new things that you're trying to connect both with?
I think we find that there's like the standard folks that are always going to be the first ones in because they really like that interaction, and trying to drive them to create ways to get other people to talk is one of the things that, we're looking at, is like, how do we get those early adopters, the ones who are most interested in doing it, to actually do something that then sparks that bug in somebody else to participate. So, we've done a lot of things around, points gathering, like you interact and you get points. Everyone loves free stuff. Like, how can I win more things? Well, interact, do certain things to actually drive that content, and those people connecting is one way to actually get people to participate. But it's really hard because it's the same. If you're outgoing and wanting to talk in person, you're going to be that same person a lot of times virtually. And then it can get dominated by that person, right? So you also have to be careful of that. So, we've really tried to have moderators in rooms to make sure that it's not just the same people speaking up all the time, so that it's, other people actually have a chance. Because the worst thing that can happen is you're in a room with somebody who's really dominating, and then you are now intimidated to speak even more. So trying to figure out like how we can actually make people feel comfortable, and actually do that. So a lot of the times we require, cameras on if you're participating, because it's easy to not engage if your camera's not on. So, we really try and push that, because that's one way you can get reactions from folks, or you can say, oh, Lauren, you smiled at that. Do you have any thoughts on it, as a way to get people to actually interact?
And do you find that whenever you're looking for presenters at your virtual events in particular, where it's, they're talking kind of like this, they're talking to an audience that they can't see, or sometimes can see, if people do have their cameras on, do you have to find people who are good at that? You know what I mean? Who are good at kind of picking that out? I mean, I've definitely seen the difference of having someone clam up and just talk to a deck versus having people who have really enjoyed like working the audience. I've experienced that as an attendee, and I tune out whenever it's just like super,
you have to be engaging, right?
Like,
you can't be just reading slides. Like, people can tell if you're just reading slides. So you have to be engaging. You have to be a little bit off the cuff. Like, you want to know what you're talking about, but you also have to have some personality in there. I think what I've also discovered is that some people who don't like to present in person are much better at it virtually, because it's much easier to have a conversation. I'm having a conversation with you as opposed to seeing, 9,000 people watching me. And some people have really, flourished in that, because it takes a little bit of the fear away, because you can't actually see people reacting to you. So that's been an interesting thing to see, is the difference between those who can work a room a little bit better than who can work a virtual room. And it doesn't always translate, which was an interesting thing to actually learn. So, we definitely look at presenters. A lot of our topics are very technical. So it's a lot of folks who can really speak that technical talk, but you also need to be able to engage with folks. So you need some people who can actually, bring a little vibrancy to the topic. And there's going to be the times when it's literally just like code, 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 code. I just want to see that. I don't care about that. So you have to know the audience that's coming to the session as well, right? Like it can't just be, it's not one fits all in the situation. You have to understand who you're talking to, what the audience is, and what type of presenter is going to be the right one for you.
I think that's great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how your events at Databricks have changed kind of quite drastically in the past 2 years. Like you said earlier, you were primarily live. So, and now, I mean, you've had some of the most robust virtual and hybrid events that I've ever seen. So can you walk us through that journey of, going from live and kind of what it took to get you to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I think, we were all a little surprised at what it took in the beginning. I think everyone sort of had this feeling like, okay, we just take all the content, we put it online, and it just runs, and it's going to be great. And I don't think we really thought about what the back end of it really looked like and the preparation that it really took. So I think we walked into it, like, this is not going to be that difficult. And then you're like, oh, this is probably actually harder than doing an in-person event. Partly because, you've had so much experience with in-person, and now you're pivoting totally to something new and different, and having to learn a new skill set along the way. So I think we really looked at it from the perspective of, how do we keep the community feel? How do we keep that engagement, that interaction in a virtual world? And how do we accomplish this? And how do we make it so that people actually participate, right? Because you don't want to do all these things and then people don't click into, we would do, for our CKO, we would have Pilates breaks and like movement breaks and dance classes and all these things. Like, what if no one actually comes? It's like you're having a party and no one shows up. It would be the worst thing in the world. And all the time and effort you put into it is not really reflected. Like, the audience has no idea what it actually takes to do all these things. I mean, I think I remember, when we did Data and AI Summit, we had 14 concurrent sessions running. We had like over 200 pieces of content running, and understanding that a speaker had to be associated with a session to have the permissions to go in there and answer questions and do all these things. And it's just like, you don't think about what that aspect actually is. So getting just a real understanding of what we actually had to do was the first step, right? Like, we had to get our agency on board, then we had to, get you guys on board, and we really had to think about, what does this planning process look like? What does the timeline actually entail? Because it was different for everybody. Our creative elements that we needed were different. Content, like, how do we actually run content? We had to record everything. Do we have to review everything? So all these different processes had to be put in place. And the number one thing that we really had to do is get that timeline together. Did that timeline work? No.
It rarely does.
Many times. I think, I'm sure we had some choice words probably from your side of the house, with things not being due on time over and over and over again. But to us, it was a whole new learning experience. So trying to figure out what those things and those steps actually were. And now we have a really good playbook, but it was all trial and error. And it was a lot of learning that first time around, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so for us, trying to figure out what we don't know was a big learning curve. But, getting the right agency on board, getting, your team on board, and then figuring out what that timeline and that work back schedule was super key to getting a successful event. Were we still making edits and doing things until day of? Yes. Were we still uploading videos until day of? Yes. I'm sure Joe would love to talk about that again. But it was all things that we had to do, right? Because we also live in a world as event planners where you're expected to make things happen all the time. And people don't understand, again, what it takes to actually do things. So doing it in a virtual world when things have to be up, it takes hours to upload videos. Like they don't think about things like that. So it's your job also to make sure your stakeholders really understand what the situation is, and when no actually means no, we can't get this done anymore because it's literally too late into the planning cycle. So long process, long answer, sorry.
No, I think that's really important to showcase that. I think timelines are something so vague because in a perfect world, you have all the time in the world, or you say as you know, as far out as you can plan. That's perfect because of what you just said, of all the things that pop up. The creative, I think, is one that as a, planning events, or seeing events planned that like you don't think about when you move from a live to a hybrid event, because now you have two sets of creative you have to do. There's so many different opportunities within a virtual environment, especially if it's custom. You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like? How does the user experience, how is that affected by it? And so that's something that actually takes a lot more time than I think most people would think of. But then also just padding in time for the things like you just said, like uploading videos takes forever, or getting things like your content transferred to a virtual environment that makes sense takes forever. So I think just the trial and error has been across the board for all event planners. The trend of the past 2 years is we've just kind of had to do it, and you learn through it, and you've improved you kind of have to one up yourself every single time you do a new event because of all those new learnings. But at the end of the day, you come up with so much more innovative ideas, and you're just better prepared overall.
Yeah, and then it's always you have to then do better than you did the last time, right?
Right.
So then it's okay, don't give me all the secrets because I need to then come back with something new for the next time around, because you need to make it different and engaging the next time. I think we all thought, if you look back at the news reports when the pandemic first started, it was like 6 weeks and we'll flatten the curve and we'll be back. 2 years later. So,
Yeah.
it's how do you continually improve on the process and make things entertaining and viable enough that people are like, okay, yeah, I can come back to that because there's going to be enough stuff for me to learn again or engage in. And that's, I think, the tricky part is, how do you constantly evolve and push the limits even more?
Yeah. So now that you've kind of had some of those events, whether they be virtual or hybrid, what are some of the biggest learnings that you've found, these past 2 years?
To me, and I think I told you this once already, is like hybrid doesn't exist really for us. I think we kept saying for our CKO this year, it's hybrid, it's hybrid, it's hybrid. And then, we had a conversation. It was like, it's not really hybrid. It's two things happening at the same time. It's a live event and it's a virtual event happening at the same time because all of our content was live. We had breakouts. We had, each department had a breakout with multiple breakout sessions within that breakout. It's not just I'm showing content on one stage and people are watching at home and that's it. And that's the shared experience. We had team building experiences. We had, movement breaks. We had all these different things happening, and you have to pay attention to each audience. You can't look at the audience as one thing because they're having a different experience. So you have to look and think through the process for what each person is experiencing. You can't say, okay, I'm just gonna give this and that's it. Of course, in-person experience is generally going to be a better thing, right? Because you're actually interacting with people. So how do you make those people at home still feel like they're part of it? So I think that's the biggest learning for me, is just to think of it as, yes, it's one group coming together, but it is two separate experiences, and you can't shortchange one for the other. Likely you're going to spend more time or energy on that in-person experience because there's a lot of levels of intricacy, but there's so many things that you need to do for that virtual audience that is not just saying it's hybrid and we're done. You really have to think through that process. So that's for me, number one. I think the other thing is also timing. There's never enough time. We start 6, 8, 9 months in advance, and the same things are always delayed. The same things are always behind. The same things are always happening. There's never enough time. So, give yourself as much leeway as possible, but it's, the sooner you start, obviously the better. But my feeling is also, if you give people enough time, Sometimes they change their mind, so you can get an answer on something in June, and guess what? In September it's changed, and the show's in October, and
Oh
you're like,
yeah.
would have been great. So
Yeah.
that's really the big thing for me. It's like, the timelines, give yourself as much time as possible. You have to also be prepared for not understanding the things that you're not going to understand. Like, I had no idea. We had backup plan to backup plan to backup plan when we ran Data and AI Summit the first time. Like, what happens if this fails? What happens if this fails? What happens if that fails? There's many things I had no idea. And now am starting to have to become an IT expert on top of all these other things. And luckily we have really great teams that can support us on these things. But what is that going to look like if something fails? What if we have to pivot? What if this happens? What if somebody gets in and makes comments? There's all these different things. So just be prepared to not understand everything. And you're going to have to learn along the way. And I think that's super key. And I think if your stakeholders understand that, because they're looking at you as the expert, and you're like, still trying to figure it out. Like, they have to understand what the playing field is as well. That this is a new thing that you have to consistently keep learning, because things keep changing and people want new things, and there's new ways to do it. Like, even between our last Data and AI to the one the following year, things had changed. So how do you actually continue to pivot and to learn and to grow?
I think that is, first off, just a phenomenal kind of summation of what we've been trying to kind of tell as a story the past 5 weeks. I think it just kind of, one, giving each other some grace as we learn all of this and do all of these things, and giving yourself grace as you plan through all of that, because it's constantly changing. It is truly like shifting every day. I see it from the tech side. You probably see it from all the sides as an event planner, but I like kind of how you summarized the hybrid experience in general. You just can't clone the live experience to virtual. It's just not the way it goes. It doesn't work well. It's failed many times. And so kind of giving yourself the time to do that and understanding that you're not going to know is appropriate. It's going to happen. It's unavoidable. So having good partners is key. Like, you have to have people that are in your playing field too, because if you have, let's say, someone who is not reliable, or something happens and they don't have a fix, you can have as many kind of contingency plans as you want. But if something fails, like your tech, then now what?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the scariest thing about this whole new world we live in, is that we're reliant on something that not a lot of people know a lot about. So it's hard to tell that story to stakeholders or to attendees as like, we're kind of at the mercy of this, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard when you're in the position of the planner and you're used to being able to fix problems on your own. And if you couldn't fix it, you could go stand in front of somebody and be like, I need the cupcakes on the 3rd floor now. And,
Right.
what would happen in the virtual and the hybrid world, there's a lot of things, to your point, out of your control. And, it is, I need this to happen now. And you're waiting for people to like diagnose the issue. And there's people behind you saying, what's the answer? Why isn't this, why is it not working? What's happening? And there's so much that you can't control anymore. So, to the point of, you really need really good partners, because you need to be able to trust. And I think that was the biggest thing for us going into Data and AI Summit, which was our first virtual event, was, do we have somebody we can trust? Like, what if the platform falls over? Because we had seen all these other events that had pivoted really quickly, and they were on platforms that had fallen over. And we're like, that would be the worst thing in the world if we're now in this situation where we have, 80,000 people and they're watching and something happens. So that trust factor was huge for us. And then, really just understanding that you can't fix everything. Like, you have to rely on those people that you trust to then be able to go and diagnose and fix something. Because I don't understand, I don't understand where the issue lies or why this server stopped serving this thing. So really having that understanding of who you can get to. We had the call tree, same scenario as an in-person event. There's a call tree, and it's the problem is you just can't go see those people. You have to hope that they answer the phone, and they did. So that's key too.
Good. Well, I wanted to, first off, I think what you just said was very relatable to the chat. People are kind of saying what you just said as like a summary of your biggest learnings is what people, one, have been trying to tell their leadership, and then it's very relatable because we have a lot of planners that join these sessions. And so I think that's really just nice to see that it's not, everyone's kind of experiencing the same thing together. I think it kind of makes us a community, obviously, as well. But Julie said in previous sessions, there was a bit of a debate over audience, so virtual versus on-site. Which one's more important? Are they equal? So what are your thoughts on that? I think that was a really interesting way of looking at it is, they're two separate things. Which one is more important? Do you spend more time on the other? But I know you have a major global audience that you're serving with your Databricks events, and a lot of them are virtual. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I would probably argue that it's, especially for our internal events, it is completely equal. The hard part is that the in-person experience is going to be better than the virtual experience. Like we had a band, we had, live band karaoke, we had, band t-shirts, we had all these things happening for the in-person audience. So that they're going to have a good time. Yes, they had to get COVID tested every day, but they still had a great time. Whereas that virtual audience doesn't get to experience a lot of those things that happen in person. So for us, I would say it was really split 50-50. I worried most about the virtual survey results, right? Like, because I can't control everything that happens for them. Like, do they have a bad internet connection? Does stuff buffer? Was the time zone wrong? Because we're also trying to communicate with the global audience. And yes, we had replays and things like that happening, but you still don't experience, there's, 1,500 people in a room watching something, reacting to something, and you're behind by a day. What is that experience like? So for us, it was really about trying to make it as good as possible in both places. And for an internal audience, I really have to say it's split. I think externally, it's hard because they're all future customers, right? And you want to make that experience good for them as well. So I would say it's pretty evenly split again. I think the thing is, again, that in-person audience really gets a better experience. So I think we tend to pivot a little bit more about figuring out what that experience can be for that virtual audience to make sure it's as good as possible. So kind of, I don't know if it really answers the question very well, but
no, I think it does.
It is 50-50. It just has to be in our world because they're either internal stakeholders and customers, or they're future customers. And by creating an experience that is not as good, it's never going to be as good as in person, right? So how do you make it as good as possible? And really, we spent a lot of time and effort thinking about what that experience was and not just saying, okay, this is what it is and we don't care. We're just going to move forward.
Yeah. And I think you guys have done a really good job from the virtual landscape in general of introducing new features in your virtual events that have never been seen in other virtual platforms. So like playlists was a big one. Hallway chatter, which we use even on these sessions, was a big one. And I think those are a good example of what you've been able to do with tech that makes the virtual experience so much more enticing and engaging. So could you talk a little bit about your thought process behind those and why they were important at your events?
Yeah, I think we really wanted to try and make it as real life as possible. So a lot of things that happen, in Data and AI Summit is people wait outside the room after a speaker finishes and they want to talk to them and ask them questions and they want to get to know them. So our thought really was like, well, that's hallway chatter, right? Like you have those experiences with people in passing. It's not always in a session room or at a booth. It's that interaction you have that is just sort of off the cuff. So that's where the hallway chatter really sort of came from, is like, how do we create that experience where that can actually happen? And we did something similar at CKO last year as well, as we had different rooms set up where people could just pop in and talk about things. And I think that was sort of the first instance of how hallway chatter actually came to be, was just giving people that experience, an ability to not be structured, just have a regular conversation with somebody. I think so that's where that came from. Playlist was also something big because we want, especially at data and AI, we want people to experience the content and what are the other things, like what are the important things that the person sitting next to you is like, that's a great session. So creating playlists and saying, okay, if you loved this topic, go in and watch these 5 sessions. It's really great. And the crowdsource them from the community. People could say, I'm not, a speaker here, but I, run community events for X company, and these are the top 5 sessions that I think everyone should go and see, and giving people the opportunity to have those interactions with folks. We did a lot of other things around CKO. We built, you guys made us little avatars of all our executives that had trivia questions, is another way to interact and get people to experience the platform and move around and not just sit stagnant in one place all the time. So yeah, we're always looking for fun new things like that, because again, trying to create that experience where people have options and not just sitting in a chair and not doing anything. So I think people really enjoyed them. I think we had some good success there, and it's definitely something that we'll continue to do.
I think your attendees probably thank you very much for that. I've attended many events that you just sit and watch. And so that is one thing that I think is just should be across the board, should be something everyone gets to experience. So I'm glad that you shared that. And, that's something that can be found, in the future, hopefully, for not only for Databricks events, but people kind of take it in stride for their own. So kind of on that vein, did you find you were more inspired with just the tech available, not just with MeetingPlay, but just overall in the event space to be able to introduce those more creative experiences, or did it make planning kind of harder? Did it make it more muddy almost?
In some ways it made it harder because there were a lot of things that we were like, okay, great, but how do we make it different? So I think, and we really wanted to try and push the envelope in a lot of ways of like, here are the things that are available and accessible and different ways to actually think about it. So it's a little bit of both. It was a little harder because, back to my other point where it's like, how do you then make it better the next time around? Like we're in this world still, and people don't want to see the same thing. So how do we take hallway chatter and bring it to the next level? What is the next iteration of that? So love the options, but now how do we ramp it up even more is where it gets a little bit harder, because there's also the timelines and the functionality and all these other things that you have to think about. It's not just, okay, can you make it? And like, no, it's going to take 6 months to make that. Great idea, but timelines, so
Yeah.
I think having those conversations really early is really key, and getting an idea of what you actually want it to be is super important, because it's not something that you can just say, I'm going to throw up a room and this is going to go happen. Like you could do, maybe in person, if you have an extra room, you can be like, okay, this is going to be a room to talk about movies today, and it's going to be about sports tomorrow, and it's going to be about puppies the next day. It's not the same experience when you're virtual. Like you have to plan for that. So just getting a really accurate idea of what you think you want to accomplish and use is super key, because it does take time to build it out. And there's a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily possible. So how do you pivot and make sure you're still getting the experience you want in the way that can actually be done?
Yeah. And I think in addition to the options and timeline, there's kind of an elephant in the room that we kind of talked about throughout this 5 weeks, which is budget.
Yes.
And I know, that's one thing that you can't really get into specifics about. I don't think anyone can, but budget has been impacted in the past 2 years, I would say, for pretty much every hybrid event. It's always going to, be a bit different for everyone. But do you think event budgets are now going to be permanently shifted because of hybrid? Do you think, from your experience and from your own events, but overall, do you think planners will always need to provide that virtual solution once we kind of go back to live?
I think in the short term, yes. I do think at some point will probably become less of a thing, but I think it's going to be there for quite a while. I think there's still not everyone wants to travel. Not all companies are allowing travel. People have enjoyed the ease of being able to watch a conference from home. So I do think in the next at least year, possibly years, it's going to be something that we need to think about. I do think at some point we'll probably start to get more people back, and it becomes still a really important audience, but it doesn't become, a half or a dominant section of the audience. Will we always have something like this for like Data and AI Summit? Likely, yes, because the scale of hybrid is just beyond, like, I can't get 80,000 people in Moscone Center. So I think it's always going to be around for events like that, at least in the next foreseeable future. But for other events, I think it'll become probably a little bit less, but it's going to take a while. I don't think it's going to be, the next year. It's probably going to be years before it goes back to something that isn't quite as important to audiences.
And you mentioned doing surveys kind of whenever we did the shift and kind of getting people's comfortability, if that's a word. Is that a word? And I think it is. Sounded right. But doing surveys kind of throughout this next process, because I think one of the things that we're seeing is people now have been given the choice, kind of like, I think Brandy covered this in our session a couple weeks ago, where like she can't wait to get back to live, but at the same time she has a family and sometimes she just can't. So she still wants to attend your event, but if there was a virtual option, she'd be able to, in between whatever life things need to happen. And so I think now from like an audience perspective, after having been given the choice, I think it's important, and am interested to hear what you think as you continue to take stock of what they think and feel. Will that then drive your decision-making process of what kind of events you give to them?
I think it definitely will in the at least short term. We obviously live in a world of data, so it's very integral to a lot of the things we do. So we'll definitely be doing surveys and just gauging people's comfort levels. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty with new variants and things like that. So I think a lot of people are still tentative. That there's a desire for it, but there's I don't know what's going to happen, or I have, kids at home that I don't want to get exposed who can't get it, or I have elderly parents, things like that. So I think there's always going to be that level of people who definitely don't want to do it. So we will continue to survey and we will continue to, read the audience and see where we get to and, make those decisions based on the data that we're getting. There's definitely, again, a strong desire from a lot of folks, but a lot of people just aren't ready for it, or, they don't want to get on a plane. They don't want to go sit with 5,000 of their friends, at a conference. So it's definitely something we'll continue to watch and, make adjustments as we go. Our, field teams are getting back to more and more in-person things, but there's still a desire, even for 30 to 50 person events, that there's, the ability to watch remotely. But I think in that vein, it's still a matter of like, how do we continue to make sure that those folks are engaged? And it's not just sitting and watching, somebody come talk to you. So how do we continue to fulfill those needs of those people that are remote watching, and still have an experience for them?
Yeah. And that's kind of, I know we're running out of time here, so I wanted to kind of leave with one question, which you've kind of answered throughout, but if you could summarize it for the audience. So as we commence this 6-week course, can you lay out what you think the future of not only hybrid, but events looks like to you in the next year, let's say, foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think at least in the next 6 months, I think we're going to still have quite a mixture of virtual, in-person, and hybrid. If hybrid really exists, which I don't think it really does. I do think just looking at what we're doing in the next, 6 to 9 months, in terms of like sponsored events, there's quite a few that are still virtual. There's some that have no expo hall that are in person. They want that experience of people coming to watch sessions, but they don't want that extra layer of having an expo hall open. So I think there's going to be a wide variety of things. I think we'll probably start to see the pivot maybe next year. It all depends on what happens in the fall, right? Like it's every time I think we're over it, we're not. So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, but I would say there's a real good chance that we're going to have really strong hybrid events for the next year. And then we'll take a look at it and see where we're actually at and what the state of the world is. But I see, just looking at the next 6 months, wide variety of things that are happening. So it's going to be an interesting time. We've had stuff change, get canceled, rescheduled to later in the year because they're hoping, things are a little bit better in the back half of the year. Who knows? So I think we're prepared for anything. We make our budgets and we say this is going to happen in Q2. We'll be back in person, or maybe not. So it's budget A, B, C, or D. Depending on what we think the quarters are actually going to look like. So, I think we're trying to plan as much as possible, and we do have some things that will definitely be in person, but there's going to be that hybrid option for most everything, because I just think it's not at a time yet where we can say it can only be live. So I think that's definitely the rest of the year for us.
Well, I think that's great. And thank you very much for sharing that, because I know, like you said, it's a mixed bag right now. So it's hard. I always ask Joe that question. I'm like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Let's get out the magic ball and see the future. But no, I think it's just, you just kind of have to muscle through it and see what happens. So thank you very much for talking with us today, Jen, and talking about Databricks and your experiences. I know we are going to be opening up hallway chatter after, but you kind of left us off on a high note. This is the end of our last session of the masterclass. So just to our audience, thank you so much for registering, attending, interacting, giving us your questions and thoughts during it, because truly this was meant to be not just like a learning event, but just a conversation between, people who are all going through the same thing. So I hope everyone took a lot out of it. Just to kind of go over some housekeeping before we leave. In the platform, there is going to be on-demand content every session. All 6 sessions will be available for the next 30 days on the platform, each of which you can get 1 CE credit for. And that is going through the Events Industry Council. So once that is all finished up, the 30 days ends, everyone will get their credits. We also have tons of downloadable content. We have some of the decks that came through from the audience that had requested them. And every single session, each 6 sessions has its own big piece of downloadable content that summarizes what you learned, but also has tons of other learnings for you. So please take them. They're free. Share them with your team. Give us feedback on them. We'd love to see it. And then afterwards, we are heading over into hallway chatter, where we're just going to continue answering anyone's questions, kind of go through anything that we've missed today, and overall just keep the networking going. But again, thank you very much for joining us. And Jen, thank you for just being an amazing speaker and for taking it on and answering some tough questions. But other than that, I think we'll see you over in hallway chatter.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.